Open University.
How then shall we live? How then shall we live? In the words of Leo Tolstoy. And this is an existential question that becomes very important. Oh, by the way, welcome to the Open University. Almost a nostalgic feeling to this one because, as you can see, there are boxes. I'm packing up my books and I'm disassembling the familiar TV set, the scenery, the display of my life, which you've been looking at behind me in some of these broadcasts. In fact, most of these broadcasts, except when I'm on the road. As I explained in the last one, I'm leaving Osaka. Graduation is the term we academics use when our relationships come to a happy ending. And that's what my current relationship is with the person I'm sharing this apartment with, is doing. It's coming to a happy ending. We're both actually getting on very well, better than ever, because in a sense, when you throw everything up into the air and don't quite know where it's going to land, it's actually very salutary for relationship health and possibly even for your bodily health. I don't know. I'm torn between obviously melancholy and a feeling of possibility and excitement about the future. I'm so excited about my projects, but no, really, I do value I value quite a lot about this situation, and first of all, it made me think about an old Walter Benjamin essay, Walter Benjamin essay. That's the ice maker in the fridge making that noise, which is called Unpacking My Library. See, things like the ice maker, I will miss that. I will be in temporary digs for the next 6 months or so, and I won't have an ice maker for sure. I'll miss my iced yogurt drinks. I mix peach nectar with yogurt, and that is the taste and the smell of this space for me. These things will all one day be wonderful nostalgic memories, so I'm looking forward to that. Unpacking My Library. You can find a PDF of this on the web. Walter Benjamin's famous talk about book collecting. And in fact, if you go to YouTube, you can even find somebody singing the whole thing in a terribly irritating way. And also a talk by Sam Thorne when he moves to St. Ives and he talks about unpacking his library. This is not quite what I'm doing. Obviously, I am packing my library. The books which I've acquired over the last few months in Osaka, it all started back in October 2016 when I saw a picture. I'm so easily influenced by fashion, I was looking in Asahiya bookshop in Namba, because that's my day trip downtown when I'm living in Osaka, is to go to Namba and drink a coffee, an expensive coffee, in Antica Cafe à la Vis, it's called, which is just in this shopping centre, and it's a fake Italian cafe where the staff have to order the coffees in Italian from each other. And I go to this old lady bookstore, which is right next to the shopping centre, and I get these amazing old paperbacks from Europe. And I justify it to myself by saying, these cost only about 100 yen, less than the price of a cup of coffee. Coffee is like 300-400 yen, even 500. In Tokyo, it's like 500 or 600 yen for a good coffee. So you could get 6 books for that. But then I think to myself, oh gosh, but at some point I'll have to leave Osaka and either take these books back to the old lady shop in a box and just donate them back to her, or ship them expensively to Europe. And that's what I've been doing in these boxes. Boxes this size. This is the largest size of printed matter you can actually send to Europe. This is surprisingly reasonable. Printed matter and surface note takes 3 months to Europe. That will cost you 2,700 yen, which in British pounds sterling is currently £18. And considering you've got probably 25 or 30 books in there, that adds very little to their price. It might add €1 to the price of a book which only cost €1 in the first place. So compared with the price of a new book, which would be much less charismatic in my eyes and wouldn't at all capture what I'm trying to capture with my book collection, which is a certain kind of humanist French feel, actually, it's much cheaper. I mean, a new book is €15 or something, and even considering the cost of transporting these old books across the world, they're still only about €2 each. Bought them for €1 and mailed them for €1 more back to Berlin. Of course, the question is then, wouldn't you be able to replace them more easily in Europe with identical copies? And possibly I could, but I decided not to. I was going to sort through and decide what to keep and what to throw away, which is what I did with my clothes. I had a huge pile the other day here of clothes which I didn't want to keep anymore, including a lot of the sweaters you've been seeing me wear in these broadcasts. Put those outside. They've already gone to be recycled and distributed back into the second-hand clothes shops of Osaka, from whence they came. And then I just kept the satisfying clothes, the clothes which looked interesting and exciting to me, which I will then mail back to Berlin again. I've got a storage in Berlin which I can mail things to. And of course, Berlin is my ultimate destination. I'm going back, taking a step back in time to the days in which I lived in Berlin. I was going to read you a little bit from Unpacking My Library. I am unpacking my library, says Benjamin. Yes, I am. The books are not yet on the shelves, not yet touched by the mild boredom of order. The mild boredom of order. Doesn't that phrase already bespeak so much? That's what you realize, I think, when you dust off these things and decide whether to keep them or throw them away. You realize that your life is a kind of pyramid-shaped. It's an iceberg-shaped thing. There's a little tiny tip of the iceberg above the water which is the things you're using and enjoying interacting with and touching every day. And generally speaking, I can pack that tip of the iceberg of useful things into a very small bag which I can carry on my back. So when I'm traveling, I don't really miss anything. I have my laptop, absolutely the number one most essential thing I own. I have the iPhone, which is the Swiss Army knife of modern gadgets. Absolutely essential in its way as well. Whether or not you have a constant connection to the web, which I don't, I just use this, use the Wi-Fi, but I don't have a plan. I'm not indebted to any phone company. But you realize that most of the stuff you have around the house is just clutter, which is dragging you down with its materiality, and it's stuff that you bought once. I mean, these tapes here, I don't know if you can see them, some silver tape which I bought when I was posing for photographs, potentially for the cover of Clutter, I think it was, which didn't get used in the end. But I did a whole series of sort of creative dressing up kind of pictures in which I was a savage dressed in strange garb. And you keep these things, just like the calligraphic ink here. I was doing calligraphy for the typography, which again didn't get used, but I kept the ink just in case one day I might use it. But of course, when that day does come and you think, oh, where's that paperclip, or where's that extra little SIM card thing that I had, or you can never actually find it when you need it. So these things tend to be counterproductive, and they just clutter. They just sort of drag your life down with a kind of subaquatic tug. They pull you down into the depths. Actually, getting rid of some of the bigger things, I'm very tempted to just say I'm going to tip them into Osaka docks, into the bay here, off a bridge, They go in with a satisfying spot. Not saying I'm doing this, but if I were to throw things into the Osaka Bay, they would go in with a big splash and they would sink to the bottom, because they're mostly redundant electronic gadgets. Of course, that would be a criminal offence to be dumping like that. It is a little bit justified in my mind by the statistics which show that global warming, human-caused global warming, will actually increase the average temperature by 3 degrees centigrade, which will affect Asian cities the worst. And Osaka, in the Guardian's account of this, was the very first city they mentioned. This area in the docklands will be totally submerged. So possibly all my old hard disks and things, some of the things I might be tempted to throw into the bay, will be floating around with the data possibly still intact in 2070, by the time this will actually become a serious problem, in about 50 years' time. This building might just be the 8th floor where I'm living just now, peeking out above the floodwaters. And that's a sad thought, But it's also a thought which reminds you of the mortality of everything, the finitude of everything. And but as you can see here, I'm packing my library. I'm not unpacking it. I will be unpacking it in Berlin in July, I guess. It'll take until about February by ship, to reach Berlin. One of the things I did find is jolly interesting, rummaging through old things. I found this Berlin Subjective Directory, issues 1 to 4. And this it's a sort of book about Berlin and people interviewing performers, fashion designers, people from all over the world who've decided to settle in Berlin. And since I'm resettling in Berlin, this is kind of jolly interesting because there's a big feature about this guy, Monmouth Nick Carey, in here. It's like 8 pages long and it's got lots of very detailed pictures of how I lived just before I left Berlin. I think my look here is pretty awful. I always think my old looks are pretty awful, but this shows, for instance, I'd kind of forgotten that I have an Asahi Pentax camera, a Spotmatic camera without a lens, and here in Osaka I have an Asahi Spotmatic camera thread mount lens. Isn't that amazing? So I can put these two together. This justifies me now taking this lens, which is quite a wide angle. It's a 35mm lens, which I bought for my digital camera, the Fujifilm, which I'm using to film this right now actually. It's a 28mm lens, which on a digital camera is actually not that wide, but on a 35mm film camera is a very wide angle lens. Could make some very nice Polish expressionist photography in grainy black and white if I ever go back to analog photography. So I should take this to Berlin, send it. But it's also got, you can see pictures in here of me with my Lukas and Kierkegaard books and my old analog tape recorder, which I might start recording on again. Not that I ever did record music on that, I just listened to old language learning tapes on it.
Hello, boys and girls. I am Rainer Neubert, a businessman from Carl Zeiss, Jena. Our products are famous all over the world. Every year we show them at the Leipzig Fair. In Leipzig, we talk to many foreign businessmen about their orders. Sometimes, businessmen from Jena go to other countries to talk about the details of their orders and to sign the contracts. Only last week I returned from London, where I had talks with Mr. Black and Mr. Hill.
The posters, the kind of bric-a-brac lifestyle, the projector, I have an almost identical Japanese projector here. It's interesting to see, my life divides into these periods in which I accumulate things in a particular place and become relatively rooted, for me, over a process of... I was in that Neukölln apartment for 4 years. It's the kitchen with Marx and Lenin. So I did manage to become quite established and then left there for here. So that's all my books which I have in storage just now in Berlin. Old copies of Appartamento magazine. I have several copies of that here as well. Magazines are a dilemma. Are they worth sending like books, or are they worth throwing away? Actually, I'm giving these to somebody. My magazines here. But yeah, this was very interesting. Really, as a reminder of the last time I got rooted. I think I said once in my blog that it takes me until the 8th year of a decade to really feel at home and to know what the style of a decade is about, what its characteristics are. And by about 2008 I kind of knew what the noughties had been about, and I feel we're getting now to the 8th, obviously we're on the verge of the 8th year of this decade, the teens, the teenies I guess, what do we call them? And I'm in quite a similar position of kind of knowing what I've been about this decade. I've been very productive, making about 10 records and 3 books, something like that, over that period, here in Osaka. It's been a great place to work. I've been deliberately quite isolated in this city and sociable only out on my tours, so I've been spending about 4 months of the year out on the road being sociable and doing performance, and then back here having lots of time, the luxury of time, which is the most fantastic luxury, in relatively comfortable surroundings. And it's a city I really have come to love, Osaka. I must say I feel differently now about Osaka than I did before, when it was a bit of a chore to come down here. I preferred Tokyo. Now I really like Osaka because it gives me a sense of freedom. It's like a blank slate, really, and I can do anything here. It's got all the city conveniences and amenities that I would ever need. I don't know to what extent I am a collector like Walter Benjamin. He says, the mild boredom of order. He kept his books out of order. He liked them to have a very personal meaning for him and a personal order on his shelves. It's only relatively recently that I've got this kind of collector's yen, this kind of lust for collecting cheap paperbacks from the 20th century, French, German, Spanish, Italian, to give me that European ambience. Books do furnish a room. I am reading them slowly, little bits of them, but it's mostly for the talismanic qualities they have. I used to be known as a kid for pushing the books in. Before I could even read, I was really obsessed with books in the family bookshelves. Great Stewart Street in Edinburgh, where we lived. I would push the books in, just to rearrange them, push their spines back, to touch them, smell them, have this physical, tactile relationship with them as physical objects. Somebody asked me, why don't you just digitize all your books? And that's the furthest from my mind, the last thing I would do. I have to have physical books, and I don't mind this process of boxing them up. I've already sent 10 boxes to Berlin from the local post office. It's really easy. They're little, compact little boxes, and you take them on the bike and mail them, and they cost, as I say, less than 20 quid per box. And what else does Benjamin say? You need not fear having to march up and down their ranks to pass them in review before a friendly audience. Instead, I must ask you to join me in the disorder of crates that have been wrenched open, the air saturated with the dust of wood, the floor covered with torn paper. To join me among piles of volumes that are seeing daylight again after 2 years of darkness, so that you may be ready to share with me a bit of the mood. It is certainly not an elegiac mood, but rather one of anticipation, which these books arouse in a genuine collector. A genuine collector, such a man is speaking to you, and on closer scrutiny he proves to be speaking only about himself. Would it not be presumptuous of me if, in order to appear convincingly objective and down to earth, I enumerated for you the main sections or prize pieces of a library, if I presented you with their history or any of their usefulness to a writer? I, for one, have in mind something less obscure, something more palpable than that. What I'm really concerned with is giving you some insight into the relationship of a book collector to his possessions. You could take the word book out of that and say any kind of collector to his possessions. What is your relationship to objects? Do we need things? Do we need cars to drive the things around? How many objects do you need in your life? And I must say it is very liberating to throw things away. I really have loved throwing half of the possessions that I've accumulated in this flat away. I think it's great to get a new place. In my life, I love arriving in a new city, and with my little bag just full of the essential items, the nail clippers, the laptop, the toothbrush, and a book or two, and that is a guilty pleasure. Every time I go to a new city, I buy more of these musty books, thinking I can't really afford to carry them around, because each time I buy a book, you're paying a price, and your muscular, the back muscles are going to have to carry them, and you're going to have to mail them eventually somewhere else, some repository or depository where you keep such stuff, and then they'll go into that dusty pile of might be needed one day, not needed on voyage, as they say on the old ocean liners. Decks slippery when wet. So it's that one guilty pleasure, one collectible thing for me really is books. I don't collect music in physical formats anymore, apart from my 45 7-inch singles, and the book mania really started with seeing the photograph in Milk magazine of a girl posing in front of the shelves of what turns out to be the French Institute in Tokyo, which I visited for the first time just the other day, last week in fact, Friday. I went up there because it had been again photographed in Soen, the current edition of Soen, which was my favourite fashion magazine in Japan, and there's this girl in sort of stilettos with very gothy makeup, posing in front of the same shelves of French books, and the Japanese seem to have the same fascination with French culture and French books that I do. Ironically, I'm thinking if I have a project which I have to, because I'm going to be on a Greek island for the first 3 months of 2018, and I'm thinking I need to have a project. I'm going to know nobody there, be totally isolated. It's 8 hours on the ship from Athens. I need to be doing a project, presumably either like make a Leonard Cohen type songs from a room record, or and I'm not really equipped. I won't have much of a studio there, just the absolute minimum. So it won't be the ideal place to make an album, but I could write a book there, and it would be probably a book commissioned by my French editor, the guy Xavier Belrose, who commissioned the Book of Jokes in the first place, who's been the one consistent editor he put out the French edition of Un-America recently, a couple of years ago, and he's always interested in what I'm writing, and so it is quite a hermetic urge to want to do without. I'm a post-materialist. I used to write a column for the New York Times called The Post-Materialist, so I do enjoy the idea of living. What do we need? How then should we live? I think we don't need many objects. What we need are adventures and stories, and the sense of making something, and the inherent satisfaction of making something. This is the great benefit of rearranging your life, of chaos, introducing a little chaos and uncertainty into your life. You don't have Groundhog Day. You don't repeat the same day over and over again. This is the problem of paradise, is that when you reach it, when I reach that 8th year of any given decade and feel I've figured out what's going on, and I've got my niche, I've got my apartment, and I've filled it up with my stuff, then I'm too comfortable and I need to rip it up and start again. That is essentially the cycle I go through. And of course it's also a cultural cycle. Punk rock comes along and rips up the comfortable 70s template of how to make rock records. I think it's an essential Eros and Thanatos kind of scenario. Creative destruction becomes essential at a certain point, and that's the point that I'm in just now. I've got very comfortable here, and although it's precarious, it has been precarious because I'm living here. I've been living here 7 years on a tourist visa, coming in and getting in trouble occasionally with immigration for doing that, but never serious trouble, and finding pretty easy ways around it. So I'm becoming even more precarious in the foreseeable future, and but with the security, the comfort blanket, if you like, of Berlin, I'll be slotting back into Neukölln again, paying pretty much the same rent that I paid when I left Neukölln, although in slightly different circumstances. And I'm interested to see what that'll be like as well. And so that's the view from the twilight days of my life here in Osaka. I'm going to leave on the 5th of December, so I'm here for about another month, after playing a concert in Kobe, which I can see from my window here, on a clear day.